Abbas, thank you for joining me. We actually we had a bit too much chat a minute ago,
Indeed.
but I was keen to jump on with you as a fractional kind of GTM consultant supporting a not a very niche, it's probably unfair, but supporting a segment of UK business, and yeah, keen to find out what it is you're doing, who you're doing it for, and maybe cherry picking some of your secrets without taking what your expertise that you've offer. So I guess over to you for a quick intro.
Yeah, thanks, Rowan. I appreciate that. And thank you for taking the time for me to have this conversation. So, yeah, very much a fractional CRO, GTM advisor, working with technical and product led founders in life sciences, health tech, and B2B SaaS. So, founders who've kind of built that early revenue themselves but can't really scale it beyond founder sales, right? And I've been doing that for 15 years, scaled businesses from 1 to 20 million. Built teams and also have been a founder and exited a company. So it's kind of maybe not the consultant thing, but it's definitely the kind of bringing the strategy and the execution to early stage companies. I guess they bring me in when there's certainly in the 1 to 10. It's certainly something that breaks. So the founder can't be in every deal. Pipeline becomes unpredictable. Sales and marketing are out of sync. And customer success is just completely disconnected when it comes to expansion revenue. And it sometimes can be, but it's not just a talent problem, it's more of a structural one, right? And that's where I kind of try and do my best work. They've got that early traction, science is strong or the innovation is strong, but they just can't get it to something repeatable. And the founder's still closing deals and, pipeline is all over the place and they need something more structured and not sure where they start, and that's when I can really have impact.
And what brought you to this segment of the technology SaaS market, the life sciences, the health tech space?
Yeah. Last year I was leading the go to market for a clinical SaaS trial design simulation platform. And this, I joined before COVID, and I felt like it was such a personal thing that I could impact. And more importantly, I love business, so I thought I could do both. And we were building a simulation modeling platform for phase 1, phase 2 trials. And during COVID, you couldn't really recruit patients. So this allowed you to build something quite clinical and be creative in building a synthetic data patient population and then ask lots of Monte Carlo what if questions to really design a better trial at phase 1 or phase 2 to be able to get drugs to market better. And so that was a real passion. And then prior to my early career, I worked with Big Pharma, Boehringer Ingelheim, IQVIA, and then I sort of really had a passion for SaaS. And then all of that kind of came together with SaaS, tech, pharma to really then be involved. Particularly the 0 to 1 or the 1 to 20 million journey is my sweet spot. That's what I've done. So I kind of really felt that I could have really good impact in this range.
Right, and that's an interesting range from the 0 to 1 and 1 to 20. Are
Yeah.
there consistent speed bumps in that from your experience where there are usually same challenges, same objectives, and maybe same within reason resolutions at those growth stages?
Yeah, 0 to 1 is a bit more different. I mean, that gets quite tactical because you're really trying to get your first 5 or 10 or 20 customers, right? And so you need a bit of a mini brand. So I think you do definitely need to build that brand credibility and trust, or founder led brand, for that solo individual, before you can really start to sort of scale any marketing or any outbound activities. And that could be just by really having a very thoughtful LinkedIn strategy. And certainly in the clinician or scientific world, they've got all that experience, but there's a bit of a resistance to sort of obviously writing content, posting on LinkedIn. But I think they do need to showcase their expertise, and I think some of them start to, I'm not getting responses on emails or messages about my service or my new product, but then what are you doing on LinkedIn to kind of create that brand trust and that credibility and that warmth, before you do that outreach. So I think that's really important. And then you get very tactical about, reaching that 5, 10 or 20 customers, and it's really important to optimize and make iterative changes as you go along to get to message market fit, to get to your first 5, 10 customers. And that's when there's a signal that there's a level of repeatability before you start to bring in people and more structure and more resource. I also find that shiny object syndrome, right? Where, you'll try and then, attack everything, and I think it's really important to really kind of be clear or document or start the process of really being clear on your ICP, and not just technographics or firmographics, but kind of really getting into the psychology and the behavioral traits and the signals that you feel that would resonate for your product, and then really kind of narrow down into maybe 1 or 2 segments to kind of get that message market fit, and then keep on narrowing, which will actually get you better traction than trying to be everything to everyone and then resonate with no one. So that is really important in terms of sequencing and steps to take. I think the 1 to 10, I found this last quarter, I worked with 10 founders, different sectors, different stages, same place every time. They had a strong product, but commercial traction just it doesn't repeat. And I don't think it's a lack of effort or lack of pipeline, but it's just a lack of clarity when it comes to their ICP or their positioning. And I'm finding in the market that B2B companies generally, and this is me being a certified GTM partner, we do a lot of research and advisory work. We probably interviewed 100 or so companies about what's stopping you from hitting your goals, and you'd expect the market or the economy or the product, but actually it was the lack of clarity. So that lack of internal clarity when it comes to their go-to-market alignment. It wasn't the competition. And so that's a really big one, because I think sometimes you come from it's a sales problem or it's a marketing problem, and I think it's more of a holistic approach to the go-to market. And so it's more upstream in the sense that either they're hiring too early, or it's too late, or they've tried to outsource before they knew what they were selling to and to whom. And then the founder's still the bottleneck and holding all the deals together, and it's all in his head. And it's very difficult to transfer that out. And so these are some of the things that I see. And I think also some really good research by Carter and Scalewise that talk about graduation rates from C to Series A, and they've gone from 12.5% to like around 4% up to 2024. So founders and startups are getting stuck in funding rounds, and it's again the growth is stalled. Every quarter is a scramble. Revenue exists, but it's kind of fragile. They've tried to fix it, but none of it's landed, and it comes down to those foundations. You can't hire your way out of a process. So I think you do need to look at the process and then kind of then move to hiring. So I think that really is an important piece.
This might be an interesting question, but is it a case of process first, bring people in, or bring people in to build the process? If you're looking at a founder-led business that's gone through the early stages, would your recommendation be get the process in and then find the people to follow it, or bring a person in that can build your process for you and let them run with it?
Yeah, so I think that's a really good question. At that early stage, that founder-led business, there has to be some level of documentation, because there is that founder dependency. So I think it's really important for the founder, to have got some level of product market fit, definitely message market fit, but really knowing that they've got some level of repeatability and some level of documentation. And then, absolutely, then make that hire. But I think that first hire is very different to a traditional hire or an account executive. I think this founding account executive would probably need maybe not the sector expertise as much. And I find this in life science and health tech, that they over-index on, the scientific pedigree. So it's really important for them to, look at, they've got the grit, really look at the companies that they've worked for. If they come from a big Salesforce or an IQVIA type company, to a startup, it's not going to work. It's just a different dynamic. They probably are not going to have that grit or that initiative, to sort of take ownership. And I think these things you need to test for innately, from either psychometric or even the interview questioning to really understand, their motivations, and then also really looking at, the average deal sizes, some of the funnel maths, that are aligned to your particular company or ICP, so that there is some level of match that will allow them to transition better. But I think that founding AE needs to be hands-on, needs to be scrappy, needs to take the initiative, and further support the founder in documenting some of those playbooks, some of those sort of objection handling documents, and really help to further build the process out for other team members to join the company.
So if we kind of take that and kind of narrow it down, it's clinical or sector expertise is beneficial to some of it, but not the most important part. You want someone that is technology adjacent and business position relevant, so that they can walk into the environment they're going to walk into, which is a little bit of everything, role of many hats. You can call it whatever you want to call it.
Yeah.
But they need to be environmentally a good fit, business position a good fit, and obviously be commercially capable. So have dealt with the right numbers, obviously have performance behind them. And then if we can align clinical expertise based on their experience as well, then it's an even better fit. They understand both the SaaS sales journey and the end user point.
Yeah, because I think that's a really good point. Because I know previously in the health tech, and I found this running the marketing side as well as the sales function, that we would hire marketers that had, at least at the entry level, a biomedical or a life science degree, because it just really helped support, some of the technical aspects and allowed us to get to market, a lot easier, because obviously there's a lot of clinical data and regulation, and even context understanding is really important, right? So that can be misinterpreted if you don't understand some of those things. So I think that is great as a baseline, but you're right, it kind of has to be hand in hand with some of the commercial aspects. I think where some of the life science companies I've seen and I've worked with, they tend to over-index on the scientific pedigree, and probably not have enough weight towards the commercial capabilities. Albeit that can be trained, but I think you do need some of that. Certainly in a startup, in a scrappy environment, they're probably not going to have all of the resources to upskill initially straight away, unless they're really well funded. And so I think if there is some of that kind of balanced approach, I think there's going to be a higher probability of success.
And is it fair to say if you can find someone that's closer to both the clinical alignment and the commercial alignment, the time to revenue becomes shorter? If they can ramp quicker, they're realizing revenue quicker. And I'm sure in a startup business that is potentially bootstrapped or working off some seed funding, they need to start seeing revenue come through sooner rather than later.
Yeah, absolutely, and yeah, that, I mean, you'll find that they'll have 12 or 18 months runway, so that's really important. But I think certainly I found this I was told to increase the sales capacity when we had no demand generation or even marketing working for us. And so I'm a firm believer of order of operations. You do need some marketing to support the account executive. So this is another important structure for them to sort of step into that allows them to win. If they have no leads coming in or no inbound, or no market presence, it's really hard for them to ramp up. And so I think also the secondary point is to really make sure that you have maybe not the overall marketing, because it's quite scrappy, but you do need, and I am a firm believer of building the brand as well as some demand generation to really support, the account executive. Because I've had companies where they've had a couple of AEs. The founder wants to hire more AEs. They've got 12 months runway, and then talking to the AEs, they don't have a conversion problem. They've just got a very thin pipeline, and so there's a complete disconnect where the CEO wants to hire more, the AEs don't have enough pipeline between them, and so yeah, you get a really difficult disconnect, and you've got like 12 months of runway. You really then need to really kind of narrow in and really focus on that demand gen, really kind of focus on tightening the ICP and the positioning, so that you can start to increase or build pipeline to close more revenue.
So taking that first hire, what would you say a founder has a product, has grown it through passion and sheer force of will? We're at that 10, 15 customers. They're now ready to, as they understand it, bring in this founding AE. What would you say you need to get onto paper or digitally in order to start executing that hire?
I think it would be good. I mean, even before and you probably going to have this experience, right? Before they even sort of think about posting their first sales hire, right? Can they explain why their last 5 deals closed without saying they like the product? I think that's a really important one. Has anyone other than them closed a deal? If not, then maybe, the founder has a credibility, but probably not a sales motion. And I think that win-loss piece. So do they know why they lose? I think most founders can explain, that they can win. Very few will explain why the deals died. And can your buyer say yes without you in the room? I mean, that's a really important thing. And that's where you do need a bit of documentation. And are you hiring to grow or to fix? Because if we need someone to fix out sales, it might just be a bit too early. And so I think it's really important to maybe do some kind of self-reflection and ask these questions.
And the other side of that, the founder will know a good amount of what they need. There'll be an amount they don't. So are there things that as a founder you need to acknowledge you don't get? And therefore when you're looking for this person, you either need to be, I guess, shopping for, or just acknowledging there might be some learning from this person coming in?
Yeah, I don't know. So sometimes they kind of feel that they want that Rolodex of of clients every time, right? And I think if sometimes the budgets are, and I've always worked with limited budgets, and I think we're now in that era of growth or efficient growth as opposed to growth at any cost. And so I've found that maybe you can get somebody that's intellectually curious, that's got that initiative, that's got that hunger, and some level of baseline experience that you can then really mold, and support, to really articulate, your value proposition, and where you're going to resonate, in terms of the market. So I think that probably would count for a lot more, where you're going to be able to really add that expertise and get them working a lot faster.
Yeah, I've found that whenever we've supported niche sectors, and we've supported the health tech space, the med tech space,
Okay.
there is often if we can find someone that's got a black book or a Rolodex, and I think to your point, that often leans them towards someone with a big background in the clinical side, where they put so much emphasis on, if they've worked in clinical, they'll have the points of contact. What they often lack, or sorry, what they may lack, not fair to say often, is the commercial salesmanship, personship, and the understanding of technology sales, or more specifically, software sales, which is a fundamentally different engagement strategy to a product whereby the transaction is you give me money, you walk away with a product, you then use the product, and it's fine. It's created to do what it does. Software is fundamentally different. It's created to deliver an outcome, but there are many steps between you logging in and seeing the outcome. And the salesperson needs to be able to articulate that and manage those resistances from the buying unit as well.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. And even I found, I'm just thinking as you're saying that, like when we did a bit of a sales transformation project, around go-to-market, because it is a transformation process, taking a more holistic approach. And then we started to layer in, some of the sales methodologies like Medic or Medpic or Challenger, there's you need the whole you need all of them in your toolbox and then apply it as and when. That was really difficult for, the senior team being, quite scientific and saying, well, we're not salesy, we're not that, we're scientists, and we don't do that, and that was a big learning curve, and it's really hard to find that, and so I think you're right. It's important to find that balance, to get that support and to get that buy-in, and really make sure that it is a different sell. And I think certainly in the NHS it's even more complicated, right? You're not just, you've got longer proof cycles, you've got multiple stakeholders, and you really need to be able to navigate that dynamic, and you've got longer sales cycles, as you said, and so that's really important to really find someone that can manage that process.
100%. When you start getting to those enterprise long tail sales opportunities, it almost becomes a bit of project management, where you've got multiple stakeholders. It might be going through a tender or a contract review process or an RFP, and that is fundamentally different to transactional selling. Obviously, no one needs to be told that, but the mindset and also the ability to keep it moving, despite the fact that one stakeholder has now reached the potential of what they can do. How do you maintain momentum on what could be a 12, 18, 24-month sales process? And on top of that, salespeople are motivated by revenue generation and probably their bonus as well. And there is a very, very different mindset to transactional sales and seeing the bonus come through to the reward is much bigger, but it's going to take you 2 years to see that in your bank account. So again, it's finding the individual that has done that, can do that, is willing to do that. And having worked with a lot of businesses in this space, I think you can have your cake and eat it. You can have a clinically knowledgeable, software experienced, startup environment salesperson that can do all that. They're just not people often looking for that next opportunity. One, because they're very good at what they do, and their current employer wants to keep them because they're doing a great job. Or two, because the sector is nicher than others. It's not fintech, it's not martech, it's not the big techs, the HR techs. It's a more niche solution, and those smaller, those 0 to 1 mil, those 1 to 10 mil, those businesses do not get the airtime, the column space when it comes to advertising roles or being prominent on LinkedIn or being front page on Indeed. That's very dominated by bigger businesses. So yeah, we often find that you can have all the experience you want if someone can go out there and find them for you, and that is a recruiter plug, which I'm going to throw out there. So
yeah,
it's
but
possible,
I think you're right, and in that 0 to 1 and that 1 to 10, it's really important that they start to build a bit of a brand presence, certainly on LinkedIn, because I think now with the newer Gen Z, and the generation, they want to buy into the values, the purpose, and the mission, right? And if that resonates for them, then you might start attracting, talent that could work, because it's not just about working for that bigger company. So I think that's an important piece. The kind of founder-led brand needs to really be prominent. That can probably now with LinkedIn and the algorithm changes, it's creating the same sort of level playing field, for them to at least pursue that.
And you've got to be confident, your brand is critically important. However good your product is, your brand is what makes you appeal to people that want to work for you. And it's incredible. We see that. We will spend a bit of time understanding the brand and their presence in the space. So having a brand that appeals visually, but also socially. How do you respond to, if you do put an ad out, are you going back to people? If you carry people through an interview process, are you giving them due time and feedback, for example? Are you engaging with everyone, because everyone could be a future employee or a future client within reason. So it is critically important to firstly be confident that you are representing your brand well, but people you bring into your business are equally going to represent your brand well.
No, I think that's super important, and I think one thing for me, the community-led sort of events are really important to really kind of create that brand awareness, especially if you're a smaller company. I'm not saying go to everything, but it's certainly, events have come back, and it's really important to be part of that. And I think that if people buy from people, and if you can build that relationship and they can buy into the vision, that will certainly help to attract better talent.
You mentioned funding, and that there's been a bit of a drop off in kind of Series A, which we've obviously seen. We're very sensitive
Yeah.
to the market. A lot of our clients will be in that kind of pursuing or recently achieved Series A, and we're seeing less of it. Lots of reasons for it, I'm sure. There's
Yeah.
plenty going on in the world that is a bit counterproductive to money going where we would like it to go. But I guess kind of two questions, which is, what are you seeing? Why are you seeing? And how do businesses set themselves up to be as desirable as possible to receive what they're pursuing, which might be that Series A funding.
Yeah, so I'm seeing. I think anything with AI is certainly getting attention right at the moment. I'm finding certainly having worked in healthcare and life sciences, I think the UK has been great to incubate and have amazing, founders in the domain of life science and healthcare. But we do find that they get to a certain place and then they want to set up in the US, and I'm seeing more and more of that. I think this is on a macro level, with the economy, and I mean that's a complete different conversation, right? Of why that's happening. I think it's definitely improving. I think like the British Business Bank have made more of a commitment, to more funds, and Innovate UK, and we've used them in the past, and they're excellent. And I think even being at Sifted Summit last year, there was, even though we're out of Brexit, there was a lot of excitement, from European, VCs that wanted to co-invest, in brilliant sort of startups and scale-ups in life sciences and healthcare. So I think it's positive, and I think we could do more, here. Certainly with the NHS, that's a different beast, and if we could help companies navigate the NHS, and I think some of the trusts are really doing that. I think UCH do that really well. They are really supportive. If you are a startup and you want to run a pilot, they really help you, navigate that. And it's not just about the features and what it does. It's like really, realistically, operationally, what do you need to do to make this pilot work? And are people using it? Is there adoption? Because if you don't do that, you could be in a pilot for 12 plus months, right? So I think there's some initiative there, but we do have a lot of UK life science healthcare companies wanting to go into the US, and I don't blame them, because it's obviously, the decision making and getting investment is a lot faster, and there's a lot more traction when it comes to the private healthcare in the US as opposed to the US.
Well, commercially, it's a much bigger market out there,
And it's a
both
much bigger market.
geographically and economically. So
Yeah, but I think I think companies here in the UK kind of mistake that it's just a geographical extension. It's a complete new go-to market build. Different customers, different things to navigate. So I think that they need to treat it as a separate go-to market, and that's really important. I'm also seeing that, in terms of the fundraise, I mean, revenue quality matters as much as the revenue volume, right? Going into raise. So, I mean, I know investors are looking at ARR composition and net revenue retention and win rates and sales cycle length. But it's really important to have that repeatability, and is the founder in every deal. So that founder dependency is a big red flag, and that also is becoming very important, that you need to really kind of focus on the quality as opposed to just the volume, and I think the go-to-market story needs to be clean, and that needs to be set up 12 to 18 months before a fundraise, and I think that's another sort of bugbear in our sort of startup scale-up industry, that it kind of gets left quite late, and then becomes quite reactive, and just makes it really difficult to raise money.
makes sense. So Yeah, interesting point on quality of revenue and where has it come from? Because if it is reliant on one source, then that is going to be certainly a flag for investment if they're not seeing volume of revenue coming from multiple sources, or there might, like you said, be a bottleneck. So it does further weight the getting your first GTM hire right and building an effective GTM function that not only puts revenue to the business, but starts building the foundations of, an investment appealing business makes far more sense.
Yeah, definitely. And it's almost like there are a sequence of steps that you need to take. At that 1 to 10 million, and I think that they are looking for that. It's not just about pilots. I think one VC investor said that people are getting, pilots are being given out. It's just like giving out candy. There needs to be, with what we have with AI, and the ability to build something fast, and lean on AI, and be quite scrappy. They want to see early traction. They want to see that revenue, and they want to see some level of predictability, and they want to see some level of structure, that works without the founder, because that is probably the biggest red flag in terms of the risk. The dependency on the founder, and if he's the bottleneck, because then that just won't be able to scale the business. And for them, that's the big factor. And I think even on the go to market side of things, if there's inconsistent win rates, or that's another red flag, because that really leads to a lack of clarity when it comes to the ICP. Do you know why you're losing? Not just what the CRM says, but what the losing buyers actually told you. So really getting that feedback from those early customers, and build it into your business, into your product roadmap, and into your positioning around ICP, to then really kind of narrow down and kind of double down on what is working is really important.
Is there anything else you wanted to impart? Any words of wisdom? Anything else you'd like to share?
No, like I said, it's really about paying it forward. We also run a diagnostic assessment. You can find that on my LinkedIn profile. Bit of a plug, but yeah, you can try it out. There's no cost, and really, it's really great. It's a focused set of questions. It really tells you where you stand on your GTM maturity, and then really what to grow, or what to grow the most, and what to focus on next. In the next 3 months or 9 months, not 12 months, but really what to focus on next. I think for me, I think probably a few tips. Definitely, I think from a founder perspective, write it down. Write down that playbook. Before that first commercial hire. If it's in your head, it really sort of dies when you step back. And then I think we said, right, hire for the stage you're entering, not the stage that you're leaving. If you're hiring a VP or a senior AE, from a 500 person company, often fails in a 10 or 20 person company. So it's just a different trait of skills and experience. And then really measure what matters, right? Because I think sometimes we kind of focus on the activity and probably not the conversion, right? So not just looking at win rate, but win rate by segment. And also, I think there's always a big push on new acquisition, on new customer acquisition, but probably less on existing customers. How can we upserve those customers? How can we, get them to do more? And really get them to see return on investment on our solution very quickly. That customer time to value, is really important to ensure that they don't churn. And so I think when you're doing both, you're really going to start to get some level of predictability.
And that prompted another question, which I'm going to
Yes.
just throw in. So that's really interesting because you talked on new logo versus existing logo, and the commercial value of existing. So do you see founders maybe getting the timing wrong, or deferring a focus on retention and customer journey post sale at the expense of just focusing on stuff at the top? And is there a time to focus on, we've got enough customers where we need to invest in their experience and their retention, as opposed to just be throwing more stuff in the top and hoping it sticks around?
Yeah, I think things are changing, in a big way. It kind of leans into that we're not in that place of growth at any cost. It's more about efficiency and growth, and also budgets are difficult, right? With inflation and the stagnation rates in C to Series A, so you're having to do more, with less, and so there is that approach to start to really build out, some level of framework on making sure that we can upsell, cross sell, and really get customers to see that time to value. Because I think when you're doing that and you're adding new customers, you're going to see that predictability a lot easier. And I think when you look at, as I said before, it was like a sales problem or a marketing problem. When you look at it from a go-to market, you're looking at it from a holistic approach, and then you've got a bit more of a dashboard that is collectively telling you how well the business is doing. So if new business doesn't hits its target, but the fact that we've got everyone in the business that's important in the room, maybe the existing customers can pick up the slack and kind of close the gap, right? And so I think that camaraderie and that collective ownership from a go-to market perspective, as opposed to being very siloed, allows you to then be a bit more flexible and nimble. To then knowing that, okay, we've got a 3 million target, we've got existing customers doing 2 million a year, and we've got a gap of 1 million. We're not going to hit that new business target of 1 million. We're going to get to 80% of that, and so let's look at getting that 20% gap, and let's look at really making sure that we build that customer framework. And I think it's going to be really important to kind of tier those customers, right? Because being customer success, you want to sell to everyone or you want to service everyone, but then sometimes it's really important to really kind of segment those out and really focus on the ones that you want to keep, that increase that lifetime value, and then also maybe there are some that are not great customers. You want to work with the customers that are easy, that pay you the most, that stay around for a long time, that starts to really compound in a big way to really kind of allow you to hit that revenue target. So I think it's having that flexibility is important.
Well, I think that kind of brings us to a bit of a close. Like we could I'll carry on chatting. There's loads of stuff to dive into.
Yeah.
There's a lot more stuff you do, but very conscious of time, and there's only so much time people want to spend listening to my voice. So I'll spare them that. But it's been great to have you on, Abbas. Really appreciate your time.
Yeah.
And
Thank you.
I'm sure this won't be the last time we have a chat.